help me understand the difference between small group ministry and disciple making. How do you divide that line? Why do you think the Lord was really pinpointing this difference for you?
Yeah, let me just start by saying I thought they were the same. I
Okay.
was convinced they were the same. I had inherited a model that said participation equals transformation, or the best we can get at it.
Okay.
And it was at that time Jesus said, "You need to dig further because if you're not getting the right job done, then you're not doing it the right way. And if you're not doing it the right way, you need to do it a different way. You can't just put little tweaks on that or a new label on it or better branding or something like that. It has to be fundamentally different. You know that saying, if you keep doing things the same way and expecting a different result,
Yes.
that's insanity." That was the big shift, is that he had just made it clear that I wasn't getting the results that he was looking for. People weren't fundamentally different. The big thing that bugged me was that such a small percentage of people owned a sense of participation in the Great Commission.
Yeah.
That's the first thing that got me. It's like,
Okay.
why do so few people care as much as I do about the Great Commission? What's special about me? What's different about me? What happened to me in my formation? And I just started digging back into all that. That was really the first thing, was just this obvious gap between kind of my commitment to faith and most everybody else that came to the churches I led.
Yeah. One of the things that I think is really counterintuitive for often people in today's modern Western church culture is the really being kind of a little bit harder on the definition of discipleship when Jesus in the Great Commission said, "Go and make disciples." I have a simple criteria that I try to pass every definition of discipleship through, and that is, would the disciples who heard Jesus say the Great Commission, would they have recognized that as the definition? So, for example, when we say small groups are discipleship, would the disciples go, "Oh, of course, that's what he's talking about," you know? Like, that's what
Yeah.
that's like, was that what they just went through over the last 3 years? There seems to be a difference, and I think that, and I'd love for you to tease out a little bit more of the difference, because I think one of the things that's really difficult for people to understand is small group ministry originally was not a response to a passion for the Great Commission, like you just said. Small
For
group
sure.
ministry, for the vast majority of churches, came out of a specific point of pain, and that is that when you have a worship service, you have about 6 months before people will leave your worship service if they don't make a
Sure.
meaningful relational connection with somebody. And
Yeah.
so pastors discovered this stat, and the churches that figured out how to solve that problem, they closed what they called the back door, right? They were really concerned about people leaving out the back door. So, what's the best way to get people engaged in relationship? Well, it's to create, small groups, oftentimes based on life stage, so that you meet people that are in your neighborhood or that are in your current life stage. You can go through a Bible study. It doesn't mean you're not growing, doesn't mean you're not learning, but it's important to understand that the goal of that ministry is often to sort of help contain the congregants in and cause them to root in a particular uh, church expression,
Yeah.
and it wasn't explicitly designed for disciple making. So, yeah, help me understand, well, how do you see the distinction?
Yeah, I mean, every bit of that is true. I mean, even like the primary consultants back in the day, and this also, just to be, even more, painting the picture, this was also a response to when Sunday mornings went to more gather, trying to reach seekers. The seeker
Yes.
movement is like, okay, we need to add a discipleship component, and that happens in smaller environments. The care component goes to small groups. So there was a lot of pain points that this was intended to address, but none of them necessarily discipleship, unless, of course, your definition allows for the assumption. It's a false assumption, but if it allows for the assumption of participation equals maturity or transformation. And so, I mean, what's the difference? We talk about intentional disciple making environments, and so the elements of intentionality that are present in a disciple making experience that are not necessarily in small groups are a measurement of what formation actually looks like, and a focus and accountability and spiritual habits that actually render all of those, those outcomes. So that you need to have a clear definition as to what it means to be a disciple. You need to have spiritual habits that render those outcomes, and you need to have the kind of accountability and support that makes you successful in community to do such things.
Yeah.
That's just a beginning to that answer.
Yes. Yeah, it's interesting you're using the word, habits. I'm just finishing reading there's a book called, The Patient Ferment of the Early Church, and the author is going through the first 200 years of church history and their disciple-making process, and he really highlights the construction of alternative habits, that the new believers were being trained in that were extremely counter to their flesh, to what was normal in the kind of Roman pagan culture, and that this is what actually led to the evangelism explosion that happened in the second and third centuries. People just had a different quality of life because the
Yeah,
discipleship was so robust. It was so
yeah,
targeted at these habits that were so strikingly different and attractive to people in their culture. And
yeah.
we seem to have a little different strategy when it comes to evangelism. It doesn't seem to primarily be because of the incredible transformation of the disciples. It seems to really hinge on something else. And so, yeah, that's a really interesting word.
Like the
I'd love for
relevance
you to.
of the content in the group or the
Yes,
weekend message or whatever. Yeah, it's
yes,
all content dependent, which is very
yes.
centralized. Yeah.